it's a positive film. It has heroes and villains, and that it essentially is a fun movie to watch. It's been a long time since people have been able to go to the movies and see a sort of straightforward, wholesome, fun adventure.
Well, it's a fantasy. It's not science fiction so much as it is space fantasy. And it's about people. It's finally about people and not finally about science.
The story, when you actually put it into words, is only so much nonsense to hang a great visual experience onto. It's the stuff that fairy tales are made of.
Sort of boiling down religion into a very basic concept. The fact that there is some deity or some power or some force that sort of controls our destiny works for good and also works for evil.
Marvellous, healthy innocence. Great pace, wonderful to look at, full of guts, nothing unpleasant. I mean, people go bang bang and people fall over and are dead, but, no horrors. A sort of wonderful freshness about it, a kind of like a wonderful fresh air.
It's got whatever you want it to be. It's pure entertainment. It's like a roller coaster ride, and it can be interpreted as long as you enjoy it, which is the intention.
Hello and welcome back to Generation Skywalker. You are listening to the DIECAST Part 2. If anyone's been following the DIECAST, it's a 6-part series where we look at a different DIECAST area of collecting each time. And this time we are looking at the micro collection. And I'm delighted to welcome a special guest to go through this with me. It's Josh Blake. Good evening, Josh.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on this, because trying to find guests for these things and a bit of an expert in the field is quite difficult, so it makes our life a lot easier.
I became an expert only by default. Nobody really collected the line early on, and I guess I was lucky.
Do you collect all sorts of vintage Star Wars, or is it the micro collection your main area?
Well, the micro collection was just something that I was doing because I was interested in some of the pre-production aspects of it. That kind of came later on. I collect all vintage. I started with 3 3/4 inch, like most, but I actually had micro collection as a kid. When I started back to collecting seriously in the 1990s, I was just sort of getting just anything I could get my hands on at that time. This was pre-eBay years, so the micro collection always kind of held a special place. So I love 3 3/4 just the same. It just so happens that micro kind of takes up the most shelf space for me, and seems to have I pay more attention to the pre-production with micro than any other line.
Yeah, we're going to get onto pre-production a bit later on, but it is something that's quite you see quite a lot of it come up, don't you?
Yeah, it's always been readily available. It seems the guys that are really into the 3 3/4 inch stuff, the micro, if they've got something that's a high grade value, they're willing to hawk those items first to make way for the 3 3/4 inch items or whatever sort of goes with their character focus. It kind of jumps around quite a bit, which is kind of unfortunate because a lot of this stuff has garnered a lot of shelfware over time. It's jumped from one collection to another. So finding really good examples these days is becoming a little bit more challenging. But yeah, it just wasn't something that took off. So there's not a whole lot of people that are really into it. I would say today there's more collectors that are interested than there ever was. 20 years ago, no one wanted this stuff.
Crazy. It's a set that I keep meaning to dip into. I always like the fact that all the packaging is quite uniform. If you get the whole run, It's all balanced together. I think it always makes it look like a really nice setup. Now, you just mentioned that you remember the micro collection from when you were young. Obviously, it didn't last very long. How long was it available?
Well, it was only available at retail for about 6 months, and most of it just sat on shelves. That's at least how I was introduced to it. You know, you go to the Toys R Us or KB Toys, that was always the discounted Star Wars items. So they ceased production on the line January the 5th, 1983. So everything that was in pre-production at that point was ceased, and everything that was retailed, the orders stopped. So all of the order numbers that we have from internal Kenner paperwork, we don't know that they actually produced that many items. And I'll just give you just a really quick idea of what they were estimating that first year. They were looking at about 300,000 for some of the smaller sets. It was kind of a test in the beginning, but it was also something that they had put a tremendous amount of time and effort and money into, because they really thought they had a home run.
I'm always quite surprised that it wasn't as successful.
Well, it was just ahead of its time. I think at that point, I think the reason that they really thought that they had a home run on their hands was because of the interest of that time, the Dungeons and Dragons figures that were made of zinc and lead, and I mean, I didn't know any different when I was a kid. It was something that was cheap. I liked miniature items. I liked the idea that it was more realistic in a lot of ways than the 3 3/4 inch, and that's arguable. But to me, just having like a whole play set, I thought was fantastic. It was a great idea, and especially from a marketing standpoint. I mean, what better way to market something than to say, well, buy this one, but then you got to buy this one and buy this one, and then they all work together. It's like, well, then I got to have all three. Now, I got this one now, hopefully here in a few weeks I can get the other. And so I thought it was a beautifully made line. They had high hopes for it, and especially the folks at Kenner that were producing it, they enjoyed working on it. They really thought that they had a home run on their hands. So that unfortunately wasn't the case.
No, I've always been quite surprised that, like you just said, the Dungeons and Dragons and those kind of figures. I can remember growing up with my brother and my cousins who were 8-9 years older than me, and then being heavily into that. And obviously late 80s, early 90s, the Micro Machines were a massively popular line as well. So it's,
it was. I mean, it's been said several times over. It was so ahead of its time. Collectors weren't thinking of it in that way at that point. I'm sure most of us remember, in the early 80s, we had parents that were budget conscious. So if they've already, spent so much money on the 3 3/4 inch stuff, the last thing they want is, there's more stuff you've got to collect, and this is a whole new line. So that argument's been posed as well. But I think that the whole notion of them creating a line that was meant to be a collectible also kind of worked against it. At least that's the way that it was reported with some of the Kenner folks. Howard Bollinger was said to have come up with the concept, and that it was meant to be in the very beginning a collectible series. So I don't know. I mean, I wish that they had just let it go another 6 months. We could have seen more sets that went with the current set, or even just the Return of the Jedi, and see where that would have gone, and maybe it would have been a little bit more successful. But I just don't think the timing was right.
No, totally get that. I know you just said it was discounted in the likes of Toys R Us and KB, but was it available everywhere? Was it something you saw regularly?
You usually saw the same sets over and over. I mean, I can only speak from myself, my own personal experience. I was actively seeking some of these items. I never could find any of the vehicles. There were two of them that were exclusives, one for Sears, which was the Falcon, and the Snowspeeder, which was JCPenney, and those were only available at Christmas during 1982, at least exclusive during Christmas of 82, and then thereafter any other department store could place an order for those particular vehicles. I don't know if that was just an idea they had to drum up some business or what, but the orders pretty much stopped right around Christmas of 82, and they were just now rolling out some of these items, and they weren't going anywhere. It's kind of hard to gauge distribution channels at that point, especially when it's going from one country to another, which I know you want to touch on here in a few minutes, but we don't really know how many numbers were actually produced. At what point did they realize, well, this is just where were they first week of January 1983 in production with the items that were already produced? We don't really know. No. But as far as like finding some of these items, you usually saw the same ones over and over again, and at least that was my experience. But I remember seeing just dozens of the Bespin Gantry play sets and the Wampa Caves and the Freeze Chambers. And I think every now and then I'd see some ion cannons. But it seemed more difficult to find the Death Star play sets, at least for me. And again, the vehicles. So those are always a challenge to find.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Like we were touching on, the UK didn't have these, but if things do come up for sale, the two things I do see all the time over here for sale is the Wampa Cave and the ion cannon, which kind of goes hand in hand with that. And I've hardly seen any of the Death Star stuff for sale over here, so perhaps there is a less produced on that. Is
sure. Finding them in good condition, that's a whole nother argument. I mean, you can find these if you just want them loose and assembling an entire set. You could do that with relative ease. If you want to find them boxed and you want mint examples, it's going to take, in some cases, especially if there's multiple variations as well. If you get into that, there's an X-Wing fighter that I'm looking for. There's actually two. One which is an Australian release, and then one that is the special offer giveaway with the sticker on the front with the large burst. I've been looking for that for 12 years. So, and I would take these in any condition. So it just depends on what you're after. If you're just looking for certain examples, that's going to keep you busy for a while. If you're looking for any example but in good condition, it's still that you're talking two totally different. And it's this way with 3 3/4 inch. I mean, you've got items, 3-packs and items like that where guys are like, I'll just take whatever is available. And then you've got other guys who are like, I'm going to hold out for an AFA 85. Well, that might take some time.
So you've just mentioned Australia there. How many countries were these actually readily available in?
Just Canada and Australia, other than the United States. Both of those countries were doing, they had their own boxed versions. I'm not really an expert when it comes to the foreign stuff. That Robbie Mantea has done extensive research on all of those different examples. Really, my only contribution to all of that is just noticing all of those sets and vehicles look different. Well, it was mainly because they were, I believe that they were manufacturing those in from different vendors other than the United States at that time, or the vendors that the United States was utilizing. The resin looks different shades darker, and it's readily noticeable. Even the decals look different. So now, whether or not that, like for instance, Irwin Toys was doing that up in Canada, I really don't know. I have a theory that's probably what was happening. I just know that in both of those countries, the numbers were significantly lower than the United States. And even friends who grew up in Canada and friends that grew up in Australia, they'll both tell you that finding really, anything from those specific country of origins is somewhat difficult. In the micro collection is not exclusive to that.
When it comes to the packaging, I know you mentioned special offer stickers. Is that how you determine the difference between them?
Yeah, so probably one of the more interesting, in my opinion, is the Canadian version, because it has French titles as well as English titles. In Australia, the mail away has the Australian address on the back. And for all of if anybody's not really familiar with the packaging of the micro collection, there's several of them that have the flap on the back, like the Wampa Cave and the Bespin Gantry that we had discussed. Those in Australia, they actually had a hole punched through the top. So that's one of the distinguishable differences between the U.S. version versus Australian. So, but those examples look very similar to those released in the United States, with the exception of that address. I think it's like Alexandria or Melbourne, one of those over in Australia. So forgive me if I got that address wrong. It's been a long time since I've looked at that. And like I said, I'm not exactly the expert when it comes to the foreign examples, but I do enjoy them and appreciate them. And they're very, very hard to find in any condition. So if you find them, or if you find an X-Wing, send it my way.
you say they're difficult to find. Is it the chances are that they still had just the standard Kenner boxes over there?
Exactly. I mean, finding a loose example isn't very difficult, although there is a certain, I would say a good amount of interest for the Australian Millennium Falcon, because it actually has different molding. They didn't paint the cockpit, and then the cockpit ramp actually has a staircase rather than sort of a platform. I don't know if you're that familiar with the US version, but the cockpit platform just sort of extends out into the toy, and somebody had the creative instinct to change the molding when it was released in Australia, and it actually has a staircase. So, aside from the difference in the appearance of the resin and the decals, they always kind of look faded. It's basically the same toy, but the packaging, without question, with the micro collection, you could literally sell just the boxes without the toys for probably just as much, even if it had the toy in it.
Yeah, right.
In any condition. In fact, one of the Australian X-Wings that I was offered, this had to have been 10 years ago, it had a huge rip in the back, and it led all the way up to the proof of purchase, which was cut out. And I foolishly said, no, I'll just wait for another example. And they're like, are you sure? I don't know what another example is going to... That's the last one I've seen come up. Very, very difficult to find. Again, if you can get your hands on it and you collect the line, kudos, because you've got a rare piece. If you're not into micro, send it my way.
In a minute, we're going to take a look through the pieces that were produced and released. Just before we get to that, now you're one of the admins over on the Facebook group. Hopefully I get this right. Kenner Star Wars Micro Collection and Diecast?
Yeah. I've gotten that title wrong several times myself, even though I was sort of the architect of that group. So
the group's pretty active, isn't it? So there seems to be some great knowledge on there. I had a flick through it, and
there's some good knowledge, and it's kind of picked up a little bit over the years, but it's not been nearly as active as some of the other main pages. I would say especially those were super hot, 5-6 years ago. It's always been a little bit more tame, a little bit more quiet. It's comfortable. It's fairly active.
Yeah, I think it's quite a nice group, and it does seem to be stuff going on every day over there. So do go and check that out. Just want to know. I know there's customs when it comes to micro collection, but is there a reproduction issue within it, especially since 3D printing's maybe come around?
I know in recent, you're probably referring to, there was a run of the Bestman torture chamber play sets that have come up. I actually offered some back to chambers several years back. I don't know if you remember the Rebel Scum days. That was kind of like where all the collectors congregated before Facebook took off in those groups. So I was offering it over there. I would with the micro collection, customs have gone on really since the 90s. 3D printing, that's just sort of the latest craze, which I've seen a lot of those samples, and I could tell you there's really no mistaking something that's 3D printed versus something that's injected resin or made from pre-production materials that they used at Kenner, styrene, hand-painted items. Those have a very distinct appearance to them that wouldn't be confused. I think it's some of the new stuff that's coming out is fun. I mean, I'll say I'm neither for or against it. I'm kind of in the middle on some of those issues. There's other issues that I think are a lot more dangerous to the hobby. And in a lot of cases now, and this isn't really knocking some of the workmanship that's gone into, a 3D printed set, but because of the limited knowledge about how some of these play sets actually functioned, that's been made available, that's on sort of a public domain forum, I can say that they don't have the same features. If they did, that would be a little bit more of a dicey situation. And what I mean by that is I know how each and every one of these play sets work, and I know the ones that are being reproduced are not, they don't have those same features. The actual items have a tremendous amount of features that were included. And, if somebody wanted, like, for instance, when I made the back to chamber, it was just basically a stagnant model that just, you could put your figures on, and display it. And I thought it was, kind of neat. How far back did you want to go as far as customs are concerned? We could go way back into the 90s with reproduction 4-ups all the way through reproduction 1-to-1 figures. It seems to be a line there's a lot of interest in customizing micro collection for some reason.
I get the customs. I get the back to chamber. I get the torture chamber.
Sure.
They weren't produced, and they're nice. They're nice things to see being customed. I don't think there's ever really an issue with those kind of things.
Right.
It's when people try to reproduce the toys. But in the 90s, you just mentioned the 4-ups. There was a bit of a scandal
Basement Bounty
back then,
Hunters
wasn't
guys. Yeah, Basement Bounty Hunter guys. That was a group from Cincinnati. And really why I thought that was kind of a shady operation is when they first started, they weren't listing these things or trying to sell them as customs. They were painting these items up and kind of pretending that this is I don't know what this is, but I'm here in Cincinnati and I picked it up in a toy collection. It's like, sure you did. And then, I know a lot of collectors who ended up buying some of those examples, and then they did the scratch test and I'm like, dude, Kenner never used a purple resin. They never used this resin, or this paint's wrong. And then the attitude with some of because they were actually members of the local collecting club here in the very early days of the Ohio Star Wars Collecting Club. Their attitude about it was kind of like, oh, you got us, but we've got all these customs. And now, they went from $450 to $10 per 4-up. And you could get any color resin that you wanted. So that would have been fine coming out of the gate. I don't know. It's kind of strange that there's actually a market for those items now. At the time, I think a lot of, especially hardcore collectors, purists, they had a hard time, and rightfully so, a real hard time accepting that actually has a place in the hobby, because there are genuine Blue Harvest 4-ups that were cast in the original molds that look identical to the Basement Bounty Hunter. That really you have to have a real sharp eye to pick up on the parting lines, and you got to know what to look for, and maybe the base isn't sanded properly or it's not thick enough. And every time that they were casting these guys, they were doing it in molds that they had created themselves from genuine examples. So there's a 5% ratio loss with the size of the 4-up. So it was never the same size as a genuine example or a Blue Harvest. But an unsuspecting collector wouldn't even know that. I had several pieces in my collection at one point that they were kind of questionable. It's like, I don't know if this is Blue Harvest or if this is a Basement Bounty Hunter's piece, and I had to do quite a bit of research to figure it out. And most of the time, you just have to get a real example. So you got to be real careful with some of that stuff, especially now. In those days, it wasn't as big of an issue because there just wasn't very many people that were interested in micro collection in general. Some guys just completely stayed away from it. It was probably a good idea, but we, at one point or another, all of us were kind of guilty in being involved in some form or fashion of customs because we love this stuff. We like to see this stuff displayed, and that's kind of but it sucks the joy out of it when somebody has come along and they're creating something that is just not right, and it's meant to fool the unsuspecting eye just for a profit.
You just mentioned you could go right back. Has there been other scandals in relation to micro collection then?
Probably the biggest in recent years was a I'm not going to say his name because I don't know where that lawsuit is or if it's ever going to go anywhere. But there has been some attempts at making, which we've affectionately referred to now as the Green Harvest, because they went through the Blue Harvest, which was former Kenner employees that were casting these items within Kenner walls, and then it became Green Harvest, which was it was an amalgamation of several different molds. Some were production molds, some were recast molds from authentic pieces, and it was a modern DIECAST, which I guess you can still purchase, but this has more of a teal appearance to it. So it's not, and you can tell the difference between true DIECAST that was vintage versus the new under a black light. The old DIECAST glows in sort of a yellowish tone, while the new is just sort of kind of turns a real dark blue. But yeah, that kind of got, I don't want to say overlooked. It didn't go very far. I don't think there were too many. I was one of the people that actually got scammed out of a couple of pieces that I'd purchased, and they swore up and down that they were authentic. But I think that the biggest issue with all of that was the 3 3/4 inch that went alongside all of that, because it was coming from some of the same sources. And I say sources because we only suspect that they were working together, but we do know that it was coming from like probably 2 different individuals. One was a former Kenner employee, and the other was an actual collector. So that was kind of the scandal that rocked the collecting community. And when that happened, there was more 3 3/4 inch that had been faked than there was the micro. So
for quite a niche area of the hobby, it's had its scandals then, and
it's had several. Yeah, I don't know if you. I'm sure some of the listeners would frequent the. I think the DIECAST, and Ron Salvatore kind of goes through some of the older scandals that are pretty humorous. The Virginia Jarvis Brooks, that whole scandal, and I'm not going to try and retell it. He tells that story so eloquently, and it's actually pretty funny. But I can't reference which episode that is, but it's worth checking out, looking into. So
just before we move on to the pieces, then you've mentioned 4-up a couple of times. Just for our listeners and people that might not know what you're talking about when you mention 4-up, can you just give us an understanding of that?
Yeah, a 4-up is basically the what we're referring to as the hard copy of the original sculpting, and in order to capture the kind of detail that they wanted for the figures once that they were cast in zinc, they sculpted these things 4 times that original size. So the hard copies that they had generated, that's kind of like the creme de la creme in terms of micro collecting. If you can acquire 4-ups, it's kind of it's a very unique item to find, and they're very scarce these days. Of course, the goal of any hardcore collector would be to have an entire run. And in those days, at least when I had started out, a run consisted of finding the actual mold that they cast the urethane hard copy into to produce the 4-up and the original sculpting, if it still survived, and then a paint master. So the paint master was, again, a 4-up, and it was used for basically so they would decorate it exactly like they had intended to paint the 1-to-1 scale figures. So it was basically used for reference once that moved into production to the vendor. And then they had color codes that they would use, that they would send over, and swatch codes that they would use based off of those original colors that the model shop had designated per figure. So that's basically it. The 4-up, it's just a giant micro figure that's made of DIECAST, the old green urethane material.
Brilliant. Perfect explanation. Now we're going to go through the pieces that were produced. One thing I always like about the micro collection is each set that there is a lot of playability in a set. There's a lot that they do, isn't there? So I'd like you to take us through that, kind of what kind of the cost would be, and rarity, or anything else that you can think of, and figures that came with each set, if you've got that in your mind. Obviously there's quite a few.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the Death Star compactor. You've already said about Death Star being hard to find. Can you take us through the compactor?
Sure. In my opinion, that's probably one of the most clever play sets of the entire. It's very difficult. I mean, it's a toss up between that and the freeze chamber. I thought that the freeze chamber was a really neat feature but the compactor play set, man, they packed in so many what I feel is, for the time especially, was screen accurate features to that place. At the spring loaded blast door, and it had a little escape hatch that went down the prison hallway. I mean, it basically they nailed that entire sequence. The control room, and then it came with some foam for the actual compactor portion, and the figures could go through the chute down into the actual compactor, and then when you compress that the trash, it pops the door open for the escape. And I just think that it's, for all of that in one place, that I think is just brilliant. So and then that's got some of the more memorable figures to it as well. This was actually the only time in the entire, for the duration of the vintage line, that we actually got a Han Solo in Stormtrooper disguise. It was never released any other place until, I guess, 1995, when the line was reintroduced. So you had both Luke and Han in their Stormtrooper disguises, and you got another pose of Darth Vader. And then, of course, this was the only appearance of Ben Kenobi in the Micro Collection series, at least for the sets that were produced. So another Princess Leia figure. There were two different ones for the Death Star, two different poses at least. And everybody's sporting a rifle or a laser gun. So, but yeah, and then as with most of these play sets, you've got a lot of fill-in figures. You got a lot of just stormtroopers that are in different poses, and it's interesting. A lot of guys don't really know this. When they were developing these lines, they didn't really have an assignment just yet which stormtroopers or rebel soldiers would go with which play sets. So they had a kind of a rough idea, because they had done some early renderings of the figures and what they had intended to use, but there were some alterations along the way, and they actually swapped out some different figures from one play set to another, believing that those would suit that given set a little bit better.
You're right, actually. Looking at the figures, every single one of them's in quite an aggressive pose with their weapon up. Or, yeah, they're all quite cool, aren't they? They're
It's kind of like the Galactic Heroes line again. We're talking, this was developed in the early '80s, and Galactic Heroes didn't come along for another, almost 20 years or so. So. Yeah. But all of those, sporting a laser gun or a lightsaber, or so this was sort of like, in some ways, in my opinion, is kind of a precursor for a lot of different lines, not just the Louis Galoob Micro Machines. So yeah. So yeah, moving on. The Death Star escape. Honestly, I think this is probably one of the more generic sets. It doesn't really do a whole lot. It's got a cannon that I think is really cool. Tooling wise, the cannon looks very similar to the cannon that was used for the 3 3/4 inch Death Star playset, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, it's basically just like 3 platforms, and there's like a little swinging rope they call it. It isn't much of a feature. You can kind of put the figures in there, and they just sort of dangle. So. But it had some interesting figures to it, nonetheless. I really like that the pose of Chewbacca from that set. I think a lot of collectors would agree, and this is really the only appearance that we get of Luke Farm Boy, which that's a pretty interesting. They never produced enough sets to get to any of the other Star Wars themed play sets, so this is really the only. If you're a Luke Farm Boy focus collector, this would be the one to have. And again, another Vader, and you got another Princess Leia, and then some other stormtroopers again in various poses. And it's probably worth noting at this point, there's several of these poses. They kind of have their own description of, like the Disco Lobot, and some of these poses are kind of ridiculous. I think after a while, the employees kind of thought, well, we haven't done this, now let's try this. It's like, well, this looks kind of silly. It's like, let's just do it anyway. So
so that brings us on to Death Star World. Now, these sets came out. You could buy them combined. Do they all come in the same box?
You can buy them individually and combined. So I would, as far as the collecting market is concerned, from what I can see, regardless of what the internal paperwork had stated, I do not believe that there were as many Death Star playsets produced as there were Empire. I think they kind of went a little more heavy-handed on Empire, because we're talking 1982. So this is 2 years after Empire Strikes Back. So I think that there was a lower number of Death Star playsets, and that's strictly going off of what I have seen over the years, especially with the individually packed trash compactor and Death Star World. The worlds in general are relatively difficult to find in good condition. You might see something that classifies like an AFA 80 turn up, maybe. Again, I don't follow this market that closely when it comes to boxed examples because I'm so involved in the pre-production. But you would probably only find like maybe an AFA 85, or excuse me, CAS 85, maybe turn up once every 3 or 4 years. It's very, very rare, and these were pretty big boxes. I mean, even though these were micro-sized play sets, I mean, we're talking the world play sets. They had a good size to them, so keeping them in good condition was difficult. And they were jumping in and out of discount bins. The best, the most ideal collecting circumstance would be to find them having been case fresh, which several of those had turned up right around late 90s, early 2000s. But to my knowledge, there was never any worlds that had ever turned up in good condition or case fresh.
What kind of cost were these when they were originally released?
Almost everything was under $20. The worlds were I think those retailed for around $30. Again, I have all of these numbers recorded for upcoming publications, and but you're looking at the $30, $35 for a world. Individual playsets ranged from the original retail price, I think, for many of the smallest was about $7.99. Same case with the vehicles, the X-Wing and TIE fighters. Those were $7.99, $9.99 respectively. And Freeze Chamber, probably around $15. Many of these still have the original price tags on them. Some of them have been heavily discounted down so that it's kind of difficult to find, especially something like a Sears Millennium Falcon. Some guys don't like the price tags. I cherish that price tag because it's a Sears price tag that was not discounted at $19.99. I think that's wonderfully historic, and I love that price tag on my boxed example. So you're looking anywhere between $7.99 and $35 retail.
That to me sounds like another reason it may have been short-lived, because for the sort of money you're talking there, you could have picked up some of the 3 3/4 inch vehicles and stuff. And
sure,
I can see a parent picking up an X-Wing toy to go with their figures over a micro collection set.
And even as much as I love the line, I'll be honest with you, in those days, the moment that I saw Jabba the Hutt, that's all I wanted. I would have gone after that any day of the week. In fact, I probably did choose that over micro collection, especially once some of the larger vehicles came out, the Imperial Shuttle and some of those. There's just no way I would have. And again, I think, I guess, I don't know if this has ever been discussed before, but just the fact that, like I had mentioned earlier, these were like 2 years out from Empire. There wasn't any Jedi. That's why I think that if the line had gone on, progressed, at least until Toy Fair, and they could have seen some of the models that were getting ready to come out, once they saw some of those Jedi sets, I think it may have changed their minds. And from a marketing standpoint, I probably would have built some kind of incentive into the line by stating, you're going to get this exclusive Jedi playset. This is the first of its kind, and this is how you. If they had made Jabba's Palace the first piece, that would have been a game changer in my opinion. Everybody would have clamored over that item.
Yeah,
so
they could have done with that.
Let's get out of here, Han Solo. Careful, Luke Skywalker.
Introducing Death Star World. 2 play sets in 1. New from Star Wars Micro Collection line. 14 die-cast figures and action poses included.
Death Star Escape has an elevator and a cannon that explodes. Wow! It connects to the Death Star compactor. It's you and me, Ben Kenobi. What's this? Oh, no! The wall! Run for it! Beat it!
Death Star World from Star Wars Micro Collection line. Play sets also sold separately. Figures included. New from Kenner.
Moving on to Hoth now, some of my favourite sets here, I think, because of the figures.
Yeah.
The Hoth Wampa Cave. Let's start with this, because I think this is brilliant.
Oh yeah, I think I owned 2 of these growing up. Yeah, what a great set. The play set itself, there's not a whole lot to speak of. I think originally this set was it was planned to be just a little bit larger than what I think they started sectioning off some of the other sets, and they ultimately decided to just go with just a real small plastic base for this with one feature. Basically, you got the Probot, but the figures for this particular play set, these are some of the absolute. This is probably the best small set in the entire series. I mean, you got that gigantic Wampa monster and Chewie, Han, and Luke. You got 3 key principal characters, and then that really cool Probot. So this thing was packed. So
the Probot's plastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually has one zinc piece. The disc on the inside is actually
right
metal. Yeah, and then the other the head and the legs are cast in resin.
Is that purely, do you think, because of the weight and trying to get it to?
Probably. I mean, they probably could have done it in plastic, but we're talking about an era where they didn't cut any corners. You're just going to get a much better casting in. I really don't know. I mean, you bring up a good point. That may be very well why they did it. It was just sort of for the weight. I never really heard. There's not really been any pre-production materials turn up with that. I've never heard of any employee that worked on that particular figure, so I really don't know. I think if you compare that with the 3 3/4 inch figure, the Probot that went to the 3 3/4 inch playset, they look pretty similar. So it would not surprise me if the tooling was duplicated and just shrunk down. So and pardon me, I probably should have gone through some of that early on when we were talking about the pre-production, the 4-up, and what exactly is tooling. What am I referring to with that? That's a term that they use for the vendor when these items would go to the tooling facility. So, and I can kind of walk you through that quickly, since it's brought up at this point, because I actually do want to talk about that a little bit later with the vehicles. That's kind of an interesting topic. But when they had these 4-ups and they were cast in this urethane, they were sent to a facility, a vendor who actually made a negative cavity, from these hard copies. So this negative cavity was like a porcelain kind of material. It was actually said that it was actually made from DIECAST as well, and there was a machine that was used in those days called a pantograph. These guys that operated these machines, there were very few of them that were. I mean, it was just a real art form. They were more engravers than they were anything. They could do really fine detail, and they could polish these molds out. These guys created cavities that went. That were ultimately used for the production molds. So the machine, the pantograph, would downsize these from the 4-to-1 ratio scale down to 1-to-1, and then that's what they cast all of the zinc figures into. So when it came to other projects such as the Probot, I don't know this for a fact. This is just what I suspect. And if you take the Micro Collection Probot and you compare it up against the 3 3/4 inch, you'll notice there's a lot of similarities. So my guess is that they probably use the same tooling in that somewhat of the same method. They may have made a hard copy from the 3 3/4 inch. They may have taken some of the detail off or added some, and then just repurpose that particular fit, because that it was just more cost effective to go that route. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I do know that was the case with the Millennium Falcon. If you the Millennium Falcon, the Micro Collection up against the 3 3/4 inch, it's basically the same details. A little bit more than a footnote, but there you go.
Yeah, where were we up to? So the turret defense was next on the list.
Yeah, I really liked this set growing up as well. I mean, this is the one where you get Luke on a tauntaun this time around, and I don't really remember that sequence in the movie where he's wielding a gun, but just a fun figure. And I like the Rebel troopers in this one, notably because they all have backpacks, and that's kind of a neat little addition from those that were seen in the Ion Cannon. So yeah, it's pretty cool play set, and you have the 2 exploding turrets. That's one play set I could never find growing up. I saw it in the catalog, could never find it at retail, and I don't know for what reason. and I can't even say that it was in low numbers. I just never could find it.
The Rebel soldiers kind of remind me of the old plastic toy soldiers, that you handed down. Their poses, the crawling one on a knee, one with binoculars. They're very typical of that kind of toy range as well, aren't they?
It wouldn't surprise me if they used them as inspiration.
The next one, the generator attack.
Oh yeah, the most imperial of all the micro line. Very, very cool. I love the snow troopers. Of course, when you're talking vehicles in the line, everybody kind of forgets and overlooks that this playset came with a vehicle. And I'll tell you, this was the playset that I wanted. The second that I saw it, I can't say that this was what hooked me into the line, but it certainly was a contributing factor. The exploding generators and then the exploding ATST walker, so cool. And then 6 figures included. Just a really, really cool playset.
I'm quite surprised on the box art of this, the front box art, that not more's made of the Scout Walker, because it's kind of in the background in the picture, and then in small black writing it's got the Scout Walker vehicle included. But I'm surprised they haven't put it up where the figures and that are, to really emphasise you get it, because it's a real selling point in there. You're right, and that exploded, didn't it? Which was just a great piece of
I believe there were 2 different versions of that. I think the earlier ones, the head kind of just fell apart, and then they later, I think they put a pin on the inside that kind of held the head together. But I always liked how the head kind of fell apart, and exploded, so to speak. So, and it's always interesting, with some of these, it's anyone's guess which one of the snow troopers was actually the pilot of the ATST or the driver, because they're all wielding a gun. I guess he though in the picture on the front of the box, he's sort of depicted shooting out of it. So still very cool item.
And the 5 Hoth stormtroopers, it's great that they kind of army built in these sets, isn't it, rather than just one. It's nice. And then rounding off the Hoth sets then was the ion cannon.
It's a neat play set. I'll be honest, this is probably my least favorite of all the Hoth. It takes up a lot of room and it doesn't really do a whole lot. That's just my personal opinion. Very, very cool sculpting work. It was based off of the Ralph McQuarrie pre-production artwork that he had painted up. So that's, and if you compare that up against it, I think I used that when I created the banner for the Facebook page. All of the inspiration for this playset was based off of that. It's a big old piece of plastic, and the coolest thing about it, and I remember playing with the blast door for the front growing up, was just pretty neat. But it's very heavy with rebel soldiers, and you got the Han Solo. I think that pose is really cool on the Tauntaun. But and then probably my most favorite Princess Leia figures in the entire group. And of course, it's worth noting that there's 2 variations to that Princess Leia figure, which has become kind of infamous these days. The 2-finger Princess Leia versus the full hand. And why they changed that, it's anybody's guess. It probably had something to do with safety. If you can find one with 2 fingers, then you're probably looking at a $50 figure. So it's pretty cool.
It's quite interesting. There's quite a few variations, really, considering how long it lasted as well. How many things they changed, but
probably one of I would say one of the more notable, just sort of a footnote, is that Luke Skywalker, I believe, was intended for another playset. That was like I had said before. I believe that the Wampa Cave was originally intended to be a little bit of a larger playset. That Luke was at least preconceived to be included in the Wampa Cave. If memory serves me correctly, it's been a while since I've looked into some of those old notes, but very cool pose.
Interesting, and obviously Hothworld must have been a massive old set with those.
That was the biggest of them all. I remember actually owning that at one time, and it was so big. I just didn't have much. I mean, I think it was. I mean, it was at least the length of the AT-AT Walker, or AT-AT, some of your listeners may call it. But it was a big. Yeah, it was a big playset, but big and bulky. and I'm going to throw a lot of little footnotes out as I'm thinking of it. There's been a misconception over the years with the white boxed examples that the worlds had encased in them, notably Hoth world and Death Star. Death Star world had a Death Star escape that actually had the print on it, and there's been several people who have speculated that that was a mailer. Could have eventually been used as overstock in a mail order scenario, but that was not how it was intended. It was intended to be in that form for the world playset, as was the generator attack for Death Star, or for Hoth world. And again, it says Hoth generator attack on it, and it's just a white box that fit inside. Those were not intended as mail orders initially. And what we speculate is that there was just overstock, and then it was used for mail orders. But I've also seen, and I own mail order items through Sears and JCPenney, and they look very much like production. They just had a big giant shipping label attached to the side, sort of like this plastic twine wrapped up on it. So just an interesting footnote for those who are, looking for every example. Now, again, I'll stand corrected. If somebody can find one of the white boxes and it actually has the shipping box that accompanies it, and they can verify they had that as a kid, well, that's great. I'd love to see it. But I see those listed all the time, just white boxes, and they call them mail-aways, and that's not exactly what those were intended for. That's how they came prepackaged in the world play sets.
Right, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. There's me who just thought there was a little run of red boxes. There's quite a bit to it, isn't there?
Well, when someone's trying to put together an entire run, it's good to know these things. I've had several people argue with me over it, and that's fine. They swear that they ordered it that way. But then for somebody else who's saying, do I need it? And not unless you're putting together you're putting together an example of the world playset and you want it inside, it's not necessarily part of that subsequent line. At least that was not the way that it was intended.
It's Wampa Cave. Luke's inside. We better get him out. Arg, arg. Wampa!
Introducing Hoth World. 3 playsets in 1. New from Star Wars Micro Collection line. 19 die-cast figures and action poses included.
Wow, they're small enough to fit in one hand. Yeah, pow! So much for Probot Spy. It's safe, Chewie. Arg, arg! We can get back to Hoth Iron Cannon. Hey, it connects to Hoth Wampa Cave. Han's here.
Close blast doors. Raise Rebel Soldier in observation tower. Empire's approaching, Princess Leia. Activate Iron Cannon.
They're bombarding our base. Quick, connect to the Hoth generator attack. Vader's headed in with Scout Walker and stormtroopers.
Scout Walker's hit, sir. Aim for the generators, men. Good work.
The world of Hoth is ours. Yeah!
Hoth World from Star Wars Micro Collection line. Playsets also sold separately. Figures included. New from Kenner.
Right then, so we move on to Bespin, obviously known as Bespin World, the three sets that made this up, and we had the Bespin control room.
Yeah, the Bespin is my absolute favorite of the entire Micro Collection line. Yeah, what a cool feature. Yeah, the 4 figures, the 2 Lukes. I just love that Luke pointing the gun, and then the Luke being, kind of crouched over. This is where it starts to get, collectors have different names for, the weird positions that some of them are in. But, I think it's a cool figure. At least that feature growing up, the first time I saw the control room and what it did, for some reason I thought that was spectacular. Launching him through the broken window, and then Vader holding the lightsaber. And I'm just going to repeat what the archive says about the other Vader, so as to not get into any trouble with the Zig Hail Vader. So
that is the first thing you think of when you look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is.
It's quite cool that they've done the same figures twice in each one in different poses, isn't it? Depending on where you are on that.
Give it some variety. I mean, some of them were repurposed actually when they were sculpting them out and getting them ready for tooling. That was certainly the case with this next playset, the gantry. Probably the most famous figure of the entire line is the Luke lunging with lightsaber. That was the first one that was pitched with, or one of the first with the actual prototype Rao Partha figures that was conceived, and that figure was repurposed for the control room with Luke pointing the gun. So that was sculpted up, and then they made a casting of it, and they made a second casting, broke the arm off and resculpted the arm and just changed some of the details around with the base. But it's basically the same figure, just moving the arms. And once you see it and you put them next to each other, you never unsee it.
Yeah,
it's basically the same character. The gantry of the three, I would say this is probably one. I had 3 or 4 of these growing up. This is probably one of the weaker of the play sets. I always wanted to see that. What kind of a play set can you really make out of that sequence other than sort of a lightsaber duel? But I always wanted to see that the gantry extended out a little longer and maybe some more detail on it. But it had some cool figure. I mean, it arguably has the coolest figure included, which is the Darth Vader with the flowing cape. That is just such a gorgeous and if anybody's unfamiliar, they want to know more about what 4-ups are and all that, you got to check out the Star Wars Collector's Archive and see the run that Gus Lopez put together for that particular figure. That is a gorgeous figure. Gorgeous sculpting by a gentleman named Bill Lemon that was a contractor. He sculpted in a material called acetate. Absolute master of engraving and sculpting. So that's a very, very cool figure to see. So.
It is. I think you're right. And then from probably the coolest figure, I'm going to put it out there and say the coolest set, because this is
oh yeah.
We come to the last one, and this kind of makes the best spin sets. Kind of pulls them all together. This is the freeze chamber.
That was my absolute favorite growing up. I mean, it has everybody in it, and of course, I always love that sequence. I know it's not much of an action sequence per se, but it certainly is the sort of the paradigm shifts at that point, doesn't it? An Empire where the Empire finally won. Or so it felt.
Yeah.
They captured Han. They finally caught up to the rebels, and now they're going to use them as bait. So anyways, that feature, I think, is just brilliant. I loved playing with that growing up, the unfrozen Han, and then freezing him in carbonite. Such a neat feature.
So how does that actually work? Because I think once you describe this, I think everyone will want a best bin. This is going to put the price up. Because this is so clever.
They've never released one. Now I think they did a fairly good attempt. I know I could probably catch some flack for saying this, but because a lot of guys really didn't like the Power of the Jedi version. I loved that. I thought that was, for what it was a pretty neat concept. But no one's ever been able to duplicate the micro collection version. So basically what it is, you've got a platform that 2 figures are attached to it facing away from one another. So that platform is attached to a rod that goes up the center. And when you put the figures down into the chamber portion and you spin it around, the unfrozen Han is hidden up in the back panel of the playset that actually holds the top sort of canopy over the playset, and up comes the frozen Han in carbonite. It just looks like a magic trick. It's so cool, and you can unfreeze it, just leave them on the platform and do it over again, and it'll, if you get a really good example that's not been overly played with, it actually locks when you put it into position. But such a cool feature, and they've never been able to duplicate a successful freezing feature on a toy quite like the micro collection. Very, very clever. Some of the other features, I don't really know if you would call them features or not. I think Ron Salvatore did a write up in his archive entry on the stair. His favorite part of the playset's the staircase that goes nowhere.
When you attach the other 2 playsets, it doesn't attach to one of them then, the stairs. They are just randomly floating.
It sort of does. Well, we're also talking about a point which we're going to get into here in a little bit. They didn't know how far they were going to extend the line out, so they were kind of episodic screenwriters in a way. It's like, well, we'll figure that out later. Maybe we'll develop another play set and it will eventually go somewhere. And they probably would have. I mean, if you think about Bespin being multi-layered, you've got all these. You could make it, several different platforms. I mean, they were on elevators throughout those sequences in Empire. I don't think that it's out of question that eventually there would have been a multi-level play set that would have attached into the freeze chamber. Again, we're going to get to it here in a little bit, but I think the set that would have really pulled all of it together is the one that never made it into production. Always been one of my absolute favorite sets, and pre-production items for that particular set are highly sought after.
The figures that came with this as well, you got 8 figures in this,
but
it also contains some great figures. It's the only time we see Boba Fett, of course.
Oh yeah.
And Lobot doing something from Saturday Night Fever.
Sure, the disco.
Yeah, he's on it, and so just the figures and Lando obviously as well.
Sure.
So
and I think that the Darth Vader pose in this, I mean, I think that's incredible. I mean, it's just, Darth Vader's one of those silhouettes that it doesn't require a whole lot of, really no description whatsoever. It's just, it's very pronounced. So I really like that pose. Even though he's doing nothing, it looks like he's doing something. Yeah, love that set.
I've waited a long time for this, Luke Skywalker. Ready, Darth Vader. Together we'll rule the galaxy.
Introducing Bespin World, new from Star Wars Micro Collection line. 16 die-cast figures and action poses included. It's 3 play sets in one.
Here's Bespin Gantry. Darth Vader's dueling it out with Luke in Cloud City. Gee, all 4 of these figures fit in one hand. Yeah, they're really tiny. I'll connect Gantry to Bespin control room. Watch what happens to Luke. Wow, Luke and the Alliance are really done for this time. But there's lots more action in Bespin freeze chambers. 8 die-cast figures. Activate Bespin freeze chamber. He's frozen solid. I bet Boba Fett can't wait. Let a car go. But Lando's at the escape hatch. He'll save Sora. Boy, he better move fast. He will, but for now I'll snap in the freeze chamber. So it's the whole world of Bespin. Yeah.
Bespin World from Star Wars Micro Collection line. Play sets also sold separately, figures included. New from Kenner.
Let's move on to the vehicles. So we had 4 vehicles. First up, Snowspeeder. You've already told us that it was a JCPenney exclusive. With that being an exclusive to JCPenney, I take it this wasn't found in Australia or Canada.
There were examples that have surfaced. Now, for the one that ended up over in Australia was actually the packaging for the US 1983 release, which had no mail away offer on the back. Right. So in other words, if the line had continued and it was successful, that particular packaging, which had already been produced in the United States for the United States post January 31st, which is when the offer had expired, that would have ended up being used here. So it was repurposed for Australia. Off the top of my head, it's not registering whether or not that was released in Canada. I don't think that it was. And I believe it was never released exclusively to Australia like the other playsets and vehicles, save the Millennium Falcon. I don't think that one was either in Australia. I believe that at least with a mail-away Australian address for where you send your proofs of purchase for the mail-away figures. So I think those two, and of course we'll get to that when we talk about the Falcon. I don't believe that those had exclusive Australian. I don't think. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me on that. Again, I have never gotten into the foreign items so much. For me, it's just always been just specifically the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter runs, which I collect. Those are the ones I've always been after, so I know exactly which one of those are available.
This being exclusive, I'm assuming this is one of the harder sets to get.
Now it's coming back to me. There was There was Australian versions of the Snowspeeder. I apologize. Now that I think about it, I do remember that there was like 2 different versions, and one of them was the US 83 with no offer, and then one with an offer. They're that rare that I just don't know anything about them.
When you say rare, how often will you find one of these come up for sale?
Oh my goodness! Some of these examples, one might pop up every decade. One might pop up every 20 years. Yeah.
So when people talk about grails and they come out with things which are readily available, these kind of things really are hard to find. And
sure, and there's no way of knowing how many of them were made. It's not like when you have an item that actually went to retail, that really is the white whale, because you don't know how many were produced. How when it comes to pre-production, we have a pretty good idea, because we know what some of the vendor requirements were for especially for like a heart or something like that. We know that they made at least 5, and then a lot of the items that have made their way onto the collecting market were just bad pours, and they have holes in them or air bubbles. But when you're talking production items, anyone can attest to that. It's anybody's guess. One might just pop up one day. We don't know, because these aren't in the possession of former Kenner employees or black hole, well, they might be in a black hole collection, but, sometimes stuff just pops up out of nowhere at random. You just never know. There may be a whole box of something somewhere, and then it'll just flood the market and the value will drop significantly. But the further you get away from the original release, now we're looking 40 years later, the likelihood of something brand new showing up, case fresh, or somebody forgot about in their basement, the likelihood's starting to shrink. So at least I can just attest for the one item that I'm looking for, the X-Wing special offer with the large burst that has the dramatic crash feature. I know that 2 of those exist. So, and that's all I can verify. And I don't know where the other one ended up. I know I had someone email me about about that specific example last week, and they asked me what the value would be, and I had to take pause for a moment. I'm like, why? Do you have one? And I told them what the last one sold for, and that's all I have as a frame of reference. It's anybody's guess at that point, what someone's willing to pay.
So the TIE Fighter is next. I found this quite interesting on the archive. I was saying that these things didn't last, but the archive have got this first issued with a circular inset, but then this shows that there was 3 reissues with changes to the box. So quite a lot of variety when it comes to this ship.
Yeah, they upgraded all of the vehicles with the dramatic crash feature. I guess they thought that would drum up business a little bit. So the next wave that came out after the initial run, which, by the way, it was early on in development, they had considered actually showing the figure through a little piece of cellophane and with some vacuum formed plastic holding the figure so you could actually see it, which I thought that would have been a really cool idea.
Yeah.
But that's where that idea came from, and they just eventually just printed it onto the box. So yeah, they did that variation after the fact, and actually what the vehicle did, the crash feature. I really liked the original, the micro collection TIE Fighter, because for one thing, it was the first screen accurate, just in terms of proportions, and then the color. So it had that really nice blue color, which they didn't. Now I know the actual model in the film, they changed that over time because they were using blue screen in those days. And I read a little thing that, the original ones were more white in color, and they progressively got more bluish as time went on. I think that by the time that Jedi came out and they did the TIE Interceptor, they went full on blue. I always really liked that, the micro collection version, because it just sort of captured the actual look. Yeah, it's just a neat little thing. That of course, it had the crash feature included with it. It's sort of spring-activated switch on the back. One of the former designers was explaining to me that he got that idea from those old Mickey Mouse characters. When you push on it, it's like spring-loaded in the middle, and it just falls apart into pieces. And then you let it extend, and then it all goes back together at the same time. It sort of has like a drawstring on the inside that pulls the arms and the leg and the head out. That's what they based the micro collection off of, at least the vehicle crash features. So they had all these wires on the inside that would push the crash feature out, and then you could fix it right back. And I thought that those were fantastic because you could hold them in your hand and have little dog fights around your house. And again, I could never find the vehicles growing up. That was probably the pieces that I was most interested in locating as an adult collector.
And the X-Wing, you've mentioned it quite a few times now. Very similar to the TIE Fighter with the types of box crash feature and everything. It's all in the same sort of setup, isn't it? With a great X-Wing pilot.
Yeah, it included one figure, and that's my favorite X-Wing. I think it's just a neat model. It's kind of interesting. I said this once before. As a kid, I was always looking for these items. And I never could find them. I was always looking for the ones in the catalog and everything. And actually owned one of the prototypes that was used on the front of the box for the dramatic crash feature that I was able to pick up in a deal about 10 years ago. And so that was a neat piece that I was able to acquire through Tom Derby, and I think he got it from, or he definitely got it from Kim Simmons. So able to trace the origin all the way back, and it's got photo printed decals that are hand cut, and there's all these molding differences between the prototype and the production example.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Superb.
Imperial TIE Fighter, attack! X-Wing spotted to face! I'm in for a dogfight!
Imperial TIE Fighter and X-Wing Fighter, new from Star Wars Micro Collection line, each sold separately.
He's in my sights! Got me! I've been hit! I'm crashing! They're built for heavy battle action. They go right back together again. And each ship comes with a die-cast figure. The sky is where we belong!
Imperial TIE Fighter and X-Wing Fighter from Star Wars Micro Collection line, each sold separately, figures included, new from Kenner.
Now, we come on to the Millennium Falcon.
Which is arguably a playset itself.
Yes.
I mean, what a cool vehicle.
This was only available via Sears, was it?
It was only available through Sears for Christmas 1982. So thereafter, anyone could place an order through any other retail chain, but Micro Collection just wasn't proving to be, it just didn't garner enough interest. So whether or not any of those orders were made, it's anybody's guess. I know some of those ended up making it over to Australia. And, actually, I think whether or not they were producing them themselves over there. What a cool vehicle. I just wish there were more figures. I really would have loved to have seen a Princess Leia figure included with that. You know, of course, you have the injured Luke and Lando, which is nice, and another Chewbacca. And, of course, arguably two of the coolest figures in the entire Micro Collection line, R2-D2 and C-3PO. And very cool for those to be included with it as well. So, and another crouching Han, sort of in Bespin fatigues. So
it is a great set, isn't it?
And I like it a little bit more than the 3 3/4 inch. I mean, of course, everybody's got that special place in their heart for the 3 3/4 inch, but by the time they got to the Micro Collection line, it was becoming a little bit more to scale, which I think was really the idea behind its development. There's a misconception that Kenner folks didn't like this line. On the contrary, they absolutely loved working on this line. The model shop employees loved it. The sculptors especially loved it because the sculptors at that time, they really didn't like sort of these poses of the 3 3 that they were ordered to create. You know, even some of those guys that were creating the sort of slouching character, just to give them just a little bit of a personality, they were scolded for that. And but with the Micro Collection, it was, man, they were able to do fine art. So they loved those poses. So they went kind of wild with some of that, and they all wanted to see this be successful, and rightfully so. They're beautifully made, and they're more to scale. They were able to pack more features in, but it's said by Hasbro, playsets don't sell. So whether that's true or not, at least that was what I was told.
I'm aware that the Falcon's a very, very expensive piece to acquire. I can remember one being for sale at a Father Schromm event about 3 years ago, and someone picked it up, and I know it was expensive then. I'm going to put you on the spot. So we've just had 16 sets. What kind of figure would you be looking at to put all 16 sets together in decent condition, complete and boxed? Not sealed, but, what do you reckon it would now cost you?
Yeah, I think you could probably put everything together a little less than 1,000. I think you could probably it's gonna vary dramatically depending on the condition of vehicles and play sets such as the TIE Fighter. Very, very difficult to find that box in good condition. The flap is always, because the flap extends about the length of the box, very difficult to find this without that big crease on the back. Very difficult to find even some of the more affordable play sets like the Gantry and the Wampa Cave. Again, there's that crease on the back. It's very difficult to find those. But yeah, you could probably put a decent run together for around $1,000, I would say. Now, I haven't followed the market as closely as I once did, so I may be way off on that estimation. But a Falcon itself is going to take up almost half of that. Those are selling pretty well, even for loose examples. They're becoming harder and harder to get a hold of. So like a minty loose condition for that, I think I saw one here not too long ago selling for about $250. I mean, I've even seen just the figures themselves sell for $75 that are still bagged, which when I saw that just blew my mind. Yeah, the vehicles are going to take up a good chunk of that. Of course, the Snowspeeder rarely ever comes up boxed. I would even go as far as to say that I've seen fewer boxed Snowspeeder examples than I have of Falcons. You just never see those. Man, if you can find a graded example at like an 85, I would say that thing would probably fetch upward 600, 650, something like that. Wow. Again, I'm no Pete Fitzke when it comes to like doing a market watch, so I don't watch it like a hawk, but I certainly do notice when examples like those come up, and it just other than just sort of the common that turn up regularly, I've rarely ever seen any really good examples of Snowspeeders and TIE Fighters. So I keep a pretty close watch on that. I have a really nice Falcon, so I don't watch that one very often. You know, I do my usual eBay searches, and of course I keep track of what's going on Facebook Marketplace, and if I can ever find it, I usually make a mental note of it. If there's an example that I'm looking for, I might pick it up. But honestly, I haven't been able to find anything that's in decent condition for. It's been a very long time. It took me just to give you an idea. I think it took me the better part of 12 years just to find a sealed version of the Snowspeeder.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, we're talking, there are not many out there. If you can find them, buy them. I mean, kudos. If you got it, keep it. There's very, very, very few of those examples exist.
And obviously, we've touched on it a couple of times, but there was a mail away offer called Build Your Armies, which is great to see. So you could army build. What was this offer? How could you take up this offer? What was included, etc., etc.?
Yeah, they included. There were 6 figures. There's 3 Rebel soldiers and 3 Snow Troopers. I mean, right up there with what I think is some of the best figures that were ever included with the line. Was the one included with the mail away, which is the laser tripod Snow Trooper. I mean, that's just really cool. They had another idea initially. I believe there was originally going to be 8 figures, I believe, with that mail away, and then they decided on the tripod and they eliminated 2. I think they ended up including the other Rebel soldier with another set. So, anyways, so yeah, I believe it was the 3 UPC proofs of purchases that you'd send in, and then they would send you this mail away. Pretty cool for those days to get something exclusive like that. And that offer extended out until originally it was December the 31st, 1982, and they extended it an extra month. And that actually, this is where you get into kind of bleed over from one part of the hobby to another. They actually were using those mail away figures as apology gifts for the Emperor. I think that they had done, another mail away for the Emperor, and when they couldn't get those out distributed on time, they ended up sending out these micro collection figures as an apology. So yeah, that was a very cool little group. You got 3 extra Imperial figures and then 3 Rebel poses that went along with it, and I thought that the sculptings for those were magnificent. Very cool. They don't have a playset to go with, and they fit right along with all the others. So
yeah, exactly.
It's Star Wars Micro Collection line with Death Star World, Ark World, Bespin World, and vehicles, each sold separately. Here are 6 die-cast Rebel soldiers and stormtroopers, not available in stores. You can get them free for 2-person purchase from any playsets or vehicles in the Star Wars Micro Collection line. Details on specially marked packages in participating stores. Offer ends January 31st, 1983. Ark World from Star Wars Micro Collection line. Playsets also sold separately, figures included. New from Kenner.
The other mailer that they had available at right about the same time, they had a lot of Access Micro Collection figures, and they were trying to figure out what to do with them. The line had failed. They ended up doing a giveaway through C-3POs. And so that was, I don't know if you remember the Rebel rocket that came with one. It was sort of like a little pop gun almost. You'd put it together and just the end of it would pop off. It had a little decal on it of C-3PO. Well, inside of that little toy was an offer for micro collection figures. And that was just another distribution channel to kind of get rid of some of the Access figures. And as late as I think right around 1987, 1988, they were still handing micro collection figures out down in Disney World for Star Tours as a thank you. It was just, so we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of micro collection figures that they didn't know what to do with. And there was some talk, around that time, well, maybe using them for game pieces, and
there was no other kind of mailers.
Not that were released. There was another in pre-production that was going to be released with Jedi. But as far as that's concerned, especially if we're talking like play sets, as I was mentioning earlier, there's been a misconception that some of those were mail-in offers through department stores, but those were actually included with the worlds. So you see those in large quantities. The Death Star Escape playset is the most infamous of these. It's always listed as a mail away or mailer, and when in fact it's just overstock that was included with the Death Star world, and that's how it came packaged. The rest of it was in a cardboard insert, and you can always see it because it always has that script on the outside that actually the title Death Star Escape. So
yeah, because I've seen a lot of them actually. You're saying
that.
Yeah.
You could probably you probably pick one up on eBay right now. I see those. I've seen those at just about every toy shop that I've been to in the last, just about every time in the last 20 years, and I see at least 2 or 3 at every local toy show here in the Cincinnati area. So
I bet you they're advertised as mailers quite often, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know if that was offered in tow marts like some of the other items, but I don't know if anybody subscribed to tow marts back in the day. But let's see, what was the other one? Lee's Toy Review. Those back in the days when we like actually bought printed material. I love that stuff. But if you bought a year subscription, they would send you like a C-3PO's dismembered, or a Salacious Crumb. This ranks right up there with the many millions of Salacious Crumbs and dismembered C-3PO bagged examples that are floating around out there. So it was the Death Star Escape playset.
Moving on to, we've mentioned them several times tonight, the unproduced playsets. There was 2 that were clearly quite far into production. The Torture Chamber and the Bacta Chamber. Just how far were they into production? How close were these to being released?
They were ready to go. They had the tooling completed for both of those play sets. Those sets in particular, I've done extensive research on, and I spoke with every employee that worked on them, and even some of the vendors that were working on that line when it was canceled. Now, I have seen the 1983 Toy Fair showroom layout for Kenner, and both of those play sets were included with that release for. That was at least the first quarter of 1983 that those were going to be released. So they were that close. But also included in all of that, and that was depicted in that diagram, was the Slave One vehicle, which we know a prototype has surfaced of that playset. 3 playsets for Jabba's palace. So
really, as many as that?
There was 3. I've actually seen pictures of the throne and the Rancor pit that went underneath. And then there was Dagobah, which was that was actually Dagobah was one of the first that was conceived for the line, and they ended up pushing that back in production to the end of the line. That was going to be released in 1983, so those were going to be Dagobah World, and then there was an additional playset to the Death Star playsets, which is the Death Star throne room, and that was part of the Return of the Jedi series. Yeah, it was going to be there was going to be quite a few items make an appearance, and it's probably worth noting at this point, since we're on that subject of unproduced, the micro collection was not exclusive just to Star Wars. They had intended to do a micro collection for Indiana Jones and for Superpowers. So they were actually looking at micro collection as extending to several different lines upon its successful run with Star Wars, which was the initial pitch. And had that been successful, we would have seen a Well of Souls playset. If you're a member of the micro collection group, one of the moderators, a good friend of mine, Bill Byers, he has the original concept artwork for the Havito's Temple. I actually spoke with a former employee. He said we sculpted that playset. I remember that working. He said it worked. There was a large boulder that ran through it just like an old marble maze, and he was able to explain this playset in great detail. And up until that artwork came out, we didn't even know what it looked like. That would have been really cool. It would have been a really cool line.
Yeah.
But more specifically, when you're asking about the torture chamber and the back to chamber, we can run through those figures and some of the features for those play sets, if you like.
Well, there was going to be some cool figures, wasn't there? I mean,
yeah.
Let's take the torture chamber first.
Mm-hmm.
There's some real fresh figures in there.
Yeah, and isn't this a strange idea for a play set? I mean, can you?
Yeah.
I can only imagine a 5-year-old. Mom, can you get me the torture chamber? Like what? I mean, I never thought of it that way as an adult collector. I'm like, when I first learned about the torture chamber, I was still a young buck. I think I was my freshman year in college, which is I had gotten on the computer, and a buddy of mine found the archive, and there it is. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. And you couldn't see it at that time because there was only like one picture of it. I'm like, what does this thing look like? And lo and behold, the gentleman that originated from, Tom Nyheisel, he only lived about 10 miles from my parents' house at the time. So, and I got to know him years later. I could have seen it, but it had already been sold by that time. But man, what a cool play set with some very cool figures. So we can go through each of these, and I guess probably one of the bigger questions that's on everybody's mind is how many of each example exists, and what are you looking to pay for each of those? It's very, very sparse. I mean, when you're getting into unproduced toys, it gets, and micro collection seems to have quite a few. There was a lot of stuff in development, and even though there was a lot of items in development, it's created quite a catalog of items that they were going to add, to the micro series line, but the availability of the items is in very small numbers, if that makes sense. So You're seeing a very expansive, aggressive expansion of the line, and luckily some of it was documented, some of it was not. But then, on the other hand, there's very few examples that have remained from those. But one of the more, I guess you could say, readily available are a few of the unproduced figures. For the torture chamber, there was 6. I guess I could probably start with the most common up to the most difficult to locate. Yeah. So Chewbacca is, by and large, one of the easier figures to locate. And I know of a woman who was a toy dealer here in the area, and she had indicated that she found upward 400 examples of those. So that was what flooded the market back in the day. It was 400 or 500 examples. There were several. So she had found those at her yard sale, and she had one up on eBay every week after everyone would sell for almost a decade. It was kind of crazy. I think I paid $10 for my first example, 10 or 12 bucks. And I bought the C-3PO in the set with what I had purchased. So I would say that's probably the second most common, that and the Ugnaught. I think those two would probably tie at this point. There were quite a few C-3POs for a time. And this is the C-3PO, very cool. It just looks like a little gold nugget. Or a little nugget. I mean, most of them, you're not going to find a painted or vac metallized example, but it just looks like a little nugget with, and it's depicting C-3PO dismembered, and it would fit into a little plastic backpack that fit on the back of Chewbacca, that figure, which had a recess and a little pin that the backpack would fit into. The backpack is virtually impossible to find. I found my example about 17 years ago, and I just got lucky. That came from, it was a well-known collector here in the area. He and I were good friends at the time, named Bill Wills, and of course, if anybody doesn't know Cantina Collectibles, they do a little show as well. So anyways, I was able to pick it up from him. He'd gotten it from a former employee that dealt in vendor relations. And they got, like a lot of the samples that came back from overseas. Very few examples of that. I think there's only like four or five, I think four plastic examples that have surfaced. And I think there are 3 squeezings. So we can touch on what a squeezing is here in a little bit. I just realized we haven't covered that. So yeah, very few. So less than 7, 8 examples exist of the backpack. And then the black Bespin guard, and there's a Han Solo in the white Bespin guard. So the crouching Bespin guard is, I want to say, one of the more common. At one time, you could get it fairly easily. Now they're becoming increasingly hard to find because collectors are trying to put together those sets. Very difficult to track down the standing Bespin guard. There's very, very few. I would say that's actually the most difficult, next to the completed FX7 in the Hoth Back-to-Chamber set, the most difficult of all the micro collection figures to find. And these are all unpainted, by the way. None of these are not. You're probably not going to find any painted examples at this point. Most of the ones that exist are all hand painted internally at Kenner, and served as one-to-one paint masters for photography. And I think there's, as far as I know, there are only 2 completed sets, and there's a few painted pieces, just random pieces out in the collecting market. I almost had an entire torture chamber run at one point, save the Han Solo in shackles. I think there's only 2 of those, the hand-painted, that exist. I know another collector was trying to track down that one to complete his set. So yeah, we're talking. This is where it really gets scarce. So, and there was some paint samples that came back from the vendor, and there was a little bit of debate on whether or not those were production colors. I don't believe those were production colors because of the dates on the vendor paperwork. There was a handful of the 2 different variations of the Bespin guards and they did like 3 or 4 different paint samples, masking test samples, and they have like a white tube, for the detail, whereas the production was ultimately going to have gold. And then as far as the play set itself, it was packed full of really cool features. It had a spring-loaded door on the front that clicked into place, and you release the door, it swings through, and there was a breakaway door on the back side that was had like an arm that extended from that door, and a little pin kind of worked like almost like a little carousel on the inside of the torture chamber, the bottom part of the platform. So it spun around with like a coil spring, and this little pin hit that arm on the back of that door, and it was kind of marketed as a blowaway door. No sooner did they get our rebel friends get captured than they made their narrow escape through the back door. The furnace incinerator worked like a magic trick. That was such a cool feature. This was a little bit more difficult to explain. It had like a conveyor unit, and you could put a figure into sort of the conveyor was kind of like this little plastic piece that had an open area on the back. Okay, and you could put a figure in it, and it would actually push the figure underneath this trap door that would raise and then fall, and the figure would fall through the bottom of the set. There was a hole that actually went through, and when you would crank the conveyor back out, the figure would disappear. It was a very cool feature. And of course you had the torture rack on the top, and then the spring, or the sort of just a door on the way through. But man, for a set that's that small, it was just completely packed with features. So
yeah, and it's much the same as well, isn't it? The back to chamber is full of quite a lot of features as well, isn't it? So
yeah, that one went through several different alterations. The original idea for that playset was that it was supposed to, I don't know if you remember back in those days, those little bottles that went with baby dolls that had like this liquid in it. When you would turn it upside down, it looked like the liquid would disappear. That's kind of the idea with the first version of the playset. The big problem that they had was there was an accordion style pump on the inside of the playset. So you can't put pressure on an item with if there's nowhere for the air to escape. And I don't want to get too technical if anybody can imagine sort of where I'm going with this. You can't pump something back and forth with that vacuum going through just a very small tube. And what ended up happening with this first mechanical drawing, at least when they made samples of the set, it exploded. So they had this prepackaged blue fluid that was supposed to kind of suck in and out of the chamber, and the liquid never touched the figure. So it was sort of a cavity that was inside of that chamber unit. You could put the figure down, and it had the perceived appearance that it was filling up around the figure. Very cool. But
great idea,
yeah. So they did an alteration of that, and they ended up putting a little water reservoir in the back, so you would actually put the water in yourself. And they ended up using a screw pump on the inside, so it would kind of worked almost like a fish tank in a way. You know, the hose would dump the water into the chamber by really sucking it into the chamber, and when you would release that valve, and then when you would continue turning it, it would pull it up into the computer module area, so which is where the screw pump was. Now, I don't know, as far as like getting the water out, it was pretty much what you put in there, it stayed in. You know, I know at least one of the models that had turned up, the original owner, I spoke with him, and he said, I put water in it, I never took water out of it. He said, I just sort of left it in there. So I would imagine that it may have, the chamber may have come with some sort of a water dye, because it would have looked really cool. I know at least in the early photography for the hand-built model, it actually had blue liquid in the chamber. So that might have been what they were going to do. I actually have packaging proof for that. It doesn't mention that, but it would look cool with blue water in it nonetheless. So, but that's how that playset worked, and it had the crane arm that placed Luke down into the chamber and then extended over, and you could put him down into the medical bed with that bed moved up and down, and then there was a scanner that went along with that. Again, it was packed with all kinds of features, and this set was super tiny. It was no bigger than the Bestman gantry. So by comparison, you can see how far that they had come in development of features, and just they were really getting their feet wet with by that point with the micro collection. They were coming up with some just really ingenious ideas. Yeah, very small set, only came with 4 figures, and again you had the Luke. They call it the Luke and diaper, which I would say is probably the Luke and the 2-1B, probably the more common of the two. I know there's quite a few collectors looking for the Luke right now, but the C-3PO, it's kind of hard to tell between C-3PO and Luke. I would say those two are probably right in the middle as far as the rarity. I don't know if I could put these in a specific order. I think the 2-1B is probably the most common, and the FX7 is by far the most difficult to find. Finding an example with all of the arms, I think there's fewer than 20 examples of those that exist. There's a few out there, but very difficult to locate. So again, I try to track these as closely as I can. The prices have fluctuated dramatically over the last decade. Therefore, 10 years or so, they were pretty much relative in price. Some of them were like $50 every time that they would go up at auction, or they were being sold. And the FX7 at that time was selling for around $250 until about 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden it's, I mean, just finding an FX7 now, I think the last one sold for a little under 2,000 in less than 30 seconds that it was posted. There's a lot more interest now, very difficult to find.
Going back, you were talking about the Jedi ones. I take it these were just concepts, and some of the figures exist though, don't they? There's early in the pre-production lines.
Yeah, there was just sculptings done at 4 upscale. They never, as far as I know to date, there's no evidence that any of these were created at 1-to-1 scale, or the size of the actual micro collection. So nearly all of the figures are accounted for, with the exception of the Rancor monster. That one was destroyed. I do know that. Right. So that one didn't survive the sculpting department at Kenner. They reused that wax. They didn't want to, but junior sculptor, he took a hammer after it and started using the wax for it, while another sculptor scolded him and said, "We spent thousands of dollars making that sculpting. What are you doing?" Again, a lot of these are showcased on the archive. I don't know that they've made a comprehensive list in recent years for these. I don't think that they have. Some of that stuff was going to come out in publications that we were working on in the future. So there were quite a few figures, and I could probably name them off the top of my head. I know with the Jabba Dungeon, that was going to have a Gamorrean guard. That was FX7. Oh, no, sorry, EV-99. Getting my droids mixed up. The Gonk droid and Chewbacca. So those just four sets, or 4 figures for that set. Then I believe there was 10 included with the throne room. So, of course, that was the one with Jabba the Hutt. Various creatures, but one of the coolest aspects of that was going to be a frozen and unfrozen Han Carbonite feature that would have an unfrozen Han that would be ejected from the wall, and a trapdoor for Luke Skywalker to fall through to face off with the Rancor monster. That would have been, in my opinion, one of the absolute finest playsets of the micro collection line, alongside of the Death Star throne room playset. So that's 2 emperors included with that. Luke Sky, I think 2 different. I think there's one or 2 different poses of Luke Skywalker, and that was going to have an Imperial soldier, Imperial commander, and then I think it had 3 or 4 different guards, Imperial guards. So that would have been, I think that appearance-wise, that would have been just a very striking place. Red figures against a gray background, and that would have had some great features to it as well. I don't really want to talk about the features that were included in that particular play set. Yeah, very cool.
The Dagobah playset, the Yoda figure, when I came across, that was quite a fascinating looking figure. It looked quite Yoda-ish to me. Well, it does look like Yoda because he's a thing, but he's I don't know. He looks old. I suppose he is old. Forget me, yeah. Kind of I don't really know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, figure.
Which figures have you come across? Are you talking about the concept figures or
they were the sculpting and the 4-up hard copy?
Okay, yeah. Some of those weren't. There were a few of those that were finished. There were a few that were unfinished. There's some of them that are actually not listed on the archive, but there were several Yoda figures to be included with the set, at least 4. And one of them was, I don't believe the sculpting was finely tuned, which was Yoda on Luke's back, and but that was one of the I think would have been one of the coolest figures included. That was actually a concept figure when they originally pitched the line early on. That would be included. At least it was in the concept artwork as well. And then probably the finest of all of the Yoda figures is if you look on the archive, you can actually see the tooling master for Yoda standing on a log using the Force. It would have been very cool. And actually that playset, again, I spoke with another former employee who worked on that, and he said that the reason that they had halted production on that is because they were trying to figure out a way around using so much foam. And we're talking about an era where they were concerned about what parents and the consumer thought about, what their kids were playing with. And they said, parents, we've halted, kind of held up production on this because we're afraid that parents are going to be upset that this foam is getting into their carpet. So one of the playsets that connects into the Dagobah world was it was basically a large piece of foam that was going to have a depression built into it where you could put the X-Wing fighter down into, and then there would be a lever to raise up the X-Wing from the Dagobah foam or the swamp. It would have been very neat, but they were trying to figure out a workaround with that, and they couldn't come up with very many good strategies, for lack of better words, so on how to work around that. So but that was going to be released, and I think it probably would have, at least from what I have seen in concept renderings and the early examples of the place, that they may have just left that depression for a child to just put water in and just pretend it's a swamp. I really don't know where it would have gone. I do know it didn't get very far into production because they had shelved that idea, that concept, and then they pulled it back out, and it was to be released in 1983. So, and it may have just been that first play set and not the entire world when it was originally going to make an appearance at Toy Fair. But I do know one of the models was made specifically for Toy Fair, and I'm not sure if that exists or not any longer. I've not seen any evidence of it being in the collector's market, but
fascinating stuff. It's could have been a real fascinating line if it had just had a few more legs and a bit more support. Yeah, it's like you say, they were clearly enjoying the sculpting, and when you see how much stuff they'd planned, they were on board with it, weren't they, the designers? But
I think they had a real good time with it. They liked experimenting with maybe what they couldn't do with 3 3/4. But a lot of these guys that were working on it, they were also working on Strawberry Shortcake at the time and Care Bears and they had other projects going on. So there was multiple departments that were working on these. It's just for the few that I would say there's one specific employee that really championed the line. He really, really liked it, and he's still a sculptor today and an industrial designer. He actually worked as a designer at Kenner, a fellow by the name of Jan Vandermeer, and he really enjoyed that line. He just liked miniature scale, like myself. He was a train enthusiast. I always liked in scale train layouts, and he collects some of that same stuff. So some similar interests, but he was really into championing that line. And another gentleman that passed away almost 30 years ago now. Both of those guys were really into it. They wanted to see it continue, and they both said they were very disappointed that the line was canceled and more were not produced. So it just sort of came and went.
One thing there is a lot of, I say a lot, in the grand scheme of things, is the pre-production items. Now you're very heavily into the pre-productions of these, of this collectible. What can you tell me about the pre-production items? Because this is a blank area for me. I browse the archive and I see so much stuff.
Right.
Can you kind of condense down the pre-productions? I know that's a massively wide open question.
Yeah. I'll first say anybody who's wanting to get into pre-production, if they want to get into pre-production micro, I'm not going to, if that's what they want to try to go after, that's great. I would, if I were somebody starting out today, I'd probably try and just put together a set of unpainted figures. Most guys have been able to successfully put together an unpainted set in around a year, little under a year's time. The unproduced figures, the only thing that I can say, and I've tried to explain to collectors who are fervently trying to locate this example or that example, just be patient. You're going to have to be patient because there's no way of knowing how many are out there. It's becoming a more popular line now than it ever was. Very difficult to get a hold of some of these examples, and you just have to wait until one pops up. I mean, there are items I'm still waiting on, and I've learned to just be patient with some of that, and some of them I might not ever find. 4-ups, that's probably the next item that is on everyone's list that they'll start with. I just want one example, any example, and I always say that's a great attitude to have, because when one comes up, grab it, no matter what it is. Once you start to get real specific, I want this example, or I'd like to have this character, that's where it gets a little difficult. Now, if you're going to really delve into collecting this stuff, get something someone else wants and try and work out a trade. I mean, that's really the only way to kind of get things moving around. Trying to find something that is just available. Most stuff does not come up for sale very often. We've had a little bit of movement as of late, probably due to COVID. So some collectors are willing to move some items around, but a 4-up and maybe a mold, if you could put together, hard copy in a mold, it'll set you back. So again, I'm not going to judge anybody's wallet. If you want to spend the money, you could probably find something. Again, you got to be patient with this sort of thing. They're not just going to pop up. Not exactly what you're looking for anyways. But over time, if you're wanting, say, like a Han Solo 4-up with a mold, it's going to take a while. You got to be ready. You got to have the money ready to go, and or the trade item. But waiting on someone to sell something, most of the time just doesn't happen. The other area is, much like the 3 3/4 inches, the 2D materials. Upon rare occasion, you will see a proof sheet pop up, or maybe a box flat. Very rarely do those ever, most of those all came from 2 different sources, Tom Neuheisel and Steve Denny. And there's just not very many of them out there. I think maybe 3-4 proof examples per play set, and then the chrome ones per play set. I think there's probably 3 maybe examples of the chrome ones per play set, and some of them are the different versions. I think there's only a couple multiples of some of those. So it looks like there's a lot, but as far as it coming up and readily available, paint samples, hand-painted examples that were done internally for 1-to-1 scale figures, that would probably be a real good area to start for the novice collector. And then the squeezings. So as far as like condensing that down, I don't know if there's an awful lot. I mean, there's some stuff that I know guys have been waiting 20, 30 years to get their hands on. Literally, they're just going to keep waiting. It's hard telling if any of that stuff will ever turn up. So
all the things like the silicon molds and that are still available, do these all just come from Kenner employees, the designers? No one. Some of them. Most of this stuff, to be honest, a lot of the pre-production items for tooling samples and silicon molds, those came from outside vendors that worked on the line. There's been, several different individuals who have scouted out both Kenner employees and have gotten leads on the vendors that worked alongside Kenner that did contract work. And that's where a lot of the hard copies came from. And I know for a fact that the molds themselves, most of them, there's been a couple, I don't want to say a couple, there's been more than a couple, but a lot of those have gone through private sales in the last 5 years, were sourced from former Kenner employees. But the molds that existed from early 2000 until fairly recently, those all came from an outside vendor that created all of the molds for making hard copies for Kenner. They just outsourced this stuff, and they told him, just pitch all this stuff when you're done with it. And he hung on to it only because he had intended to make a large size chessboard out of these, because he just thought they were so cool. That was the only reason he hung on to the micro collection silicon molds. I bet he's glad he did now.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking 20 years ago. So but he, I mean, he made off pretty well. And I mean, certainly, his only intention, well, he didn't even think they were worth anything. But fortunately for us, these guys went out and they were able to work out a deal with them and then get them onto the collecting market. And at that time, there were several collectors that were interested in the line. There was quite a bit of a buzz for anything pre-production. So if somebody wanted like a Luke Skywalker, really all that was available at that point, pre-production wise, other than like a 3 3/4 inch first shot, or maybe you could get a hold of a hard copy, some parts for 3 3/4 inch figures, was to go for the micro collection. At that time, there was quite a few tooling masters, 4-ups that were available, as well as some paint masters as well. So.
Is there anything else you wanted to bring up with regards to the micro collection?
I think we pretty much covered on just about all of it. I hopefully, if anybody, like I really I like open discussions. So if anybody, if they want to know more about the sets that were produced or even unproduced, feel free to drop a line there on the Facebook group. All those guys, they love open discussions. Check out that group, and I'm always interested to see what guys are collecting, or what they like about the line.
Yeah, I highly recommend that Facebook group. I'll make sure there's a link to it in the bio to this show.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, Kenner Star Wars micro collection and diecast, if anyone's looking for it. Great places to go and search for the micro collection. We've already mentioned the SWCA. Obviously, that's a banker.
And all the same guys that collect the line, they're in the Facebook group. So anything you're going to see on the archive, those guys are members there. So yeah, again, if anybody has any questions, and then I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but yes, Gus and Duncan did a book on the micro collection about 5 years ago. So also a pretty good resource. So yeah.
Josh, just before I close out, thank you ever so much for coming on. it's so much easier when you hear someone that's got that passion and that expertise in it. There was nothing. You just run with it, and it's good to get proper information rather than us kind of the hosts of our show just trying to get it. It's been a real pleasure to have you on, mate. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Sorry for keeping you for so long. It's suddenly got quite late, isn't it?
It's all good, man. No, well, it's probably later for you than it is for me, but no, I was going to say this at the beginning. It's always good to come on a podcast and actually talk about micro collection. It seems like every time I get a call to be on one of these, it's about a different topic. So, like, really, you don't want to talk about micro collection with me? Like, no, we want to talk about this exhibition that you were a part of. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but I'd rather talk about micro.
Yeah, no, it's been a real pleasure to have you on, mate. Thank you ever so much.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
You have learned much, young one. Impressive. Most impressive.
Be sure to check out Generation Skywalker on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where we make updates about what we've spoken about all the time, and you'll also get updates on anything we've recorded. Enhanced versions of our shows are over on YouTube, and check out www.generationskywalker.com, where we have links to all our shows, all our enhanced shows, plus some blog. So that is it for DIECAST Part 2. Part 3, which will be coming soon, is all about West End games, and that is a complete mind blank to me, so looking forward to delving into that topic. But for this show, it is goodbye, and we are Generation Skywalker.